Hi, this is Terry Taylor, and I want to talk to you a little bit about our small group material for Sunday night, September the 11th. Now, this is based on Pastor's two messages that he did in the last 2 weeks, and they were based out of 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5, and they really talk about what is godly and what is ungodly. Now, one of the things I challenged my group with at the very beginning of small group last night, because we meet on Thursday nights, was to talk about ourselves and not other people. Because I think even in our group, sometimes we say, well, I think people do this or people do that. I know people who do this. Instead of saying, I struggle with being ungodly. I feel ungodly when I do this. This is an area of struggle for me and my family. I encourage you, talk about yourself and not just about the population in general or about the church in general, but truly about yourself. Work on your small group being more personal and not just about other people or the church world in general. It starts out with did people grow up with the word godly and ungodly? One of the things we found in our small group, and this is what I thought would happen, is there are people of the younger generation who really never heard this word, because as the church used to be very, don't do this, don't do that, don't wear this, don't wear that, those were termed godly and ungodly in a lot of cases. And the older generation is very familiar with those words, maybe even people my age. But when you drop down 10, 15, 20 years, that was not used a lot because that was not a big issue in the church. And so for some of these folks, the last several years where we've talked about being godly and ungodly at Family Church, it's kind of a new thing to their vocabulary. It might be interesting to find out. Then you'll read 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5, and you have them mark in question number 2, the godly and the ungodly attributes. Be sure to let other people participate and kind of go through that list individually. Question number 3, if we didn't do this video, a lot of people would just breeze over, because it says, do you have to be wealthy to be guilty of loving money? Why do we have such difficulty admitting that we might be out of line in this area of our life? And this is referring back to verse 2, where it says, for people will love only themselves and their money. And then down in verse 4, when it says, they will love pleasure rather than God. Actually, for Christians, it's much easier to admit guilt in areas of resentment, anger, bitterness, lust, on, than it is to say you love money too much or that you care too much about pleasure. We just won't admit that almost. We all talk about it as somebody else. It's never us. We're okay. It's somebody else. But what I would question is, how many of us truly, if we make $35,000 a year, if we make $50,000, if we make $500,000, how many of us have taken that $35,000 and said, okay, God, I know $3,500 of it's yours because that's 10%, and I owe some in offerings to give above and beyond that. But if we're not careful, we'll use up every other penny and commit it so that we have no ability to be directed by God in our life. And one of the things our group kind of came to was if you made $50,000 a year, maybe if Christians would strive to not overcommit themselves and not continually have the nicer house, the nicer car, and truly listen to God about how much open money we ought to have to make decisions with according to God's direction, might be most pleasing to God. We're a very blessed people. And then you go down to questions 5, 6, and 7. It talks about 4, 5, and 6. It talks about what does godly, ungodly look like when you're out and about in restaurants and those kinds of things. And I encourage you to talk openly about that. And then questions 7 and 8 really goes to we must choose this godly lifestyle, and we have to have some accountability somewhere. Do you have somebody who speaks the truth to you, who really confronts you with where you might be struggling with ungodliness, a close friend, a family member, an accountability group? And we had a lot of people in our group who just said, no, I don't. I have nobody that speaks the truth to me. And then question 9, 10, and 11 is more about, do you have a personal relationship with God where God has time to speak the truth to us? And I would really challenge you to get all these things in place, to point people toward working for them to know what godliness and ungodliness was, to have a close friendship and relationship where people spoke the truth to them, and then most importantly, a relationship with God where God and His Word speaks to our heart and to our godliness and our ungodliness until we become more and more like him. I hope you have a great small group this weekend, and put a little extra effort toward really keeping your group on focus to these two messages that Pastor spoke and how they really apply to us. Thank you.